Hello and welcome back to Faux Hammer Videos, and this week I'm going to be painting Fafnir Rann. Before I begin, I just want to do a quick shout out and thanks to my Patreons, who I'll put here, one of the sides, and it's thanks to them that I'm able to do videos like this now. And if you want to support the channel, obviously you can join us on Patreon, but just a like, comment or subscribe to the channel really helps out. And finally, I just want to do my question of the week, and this week, as we have Fafnir Rann, who is a 30k model, I want to know in the comments, when do you think, and you may not have heard of this, but when do you think we're going to see the Horus Heresy 2nd edition get released? I'm sure it was over a year ago now when Spiky Bits actually showed us a picture of this upcoming box, and we've heard absolutely nothing from Games Workshop about this heavily rumoured and most likely release that's coming in 2022. So when do you think we're going to hear more about it? Let me know down in the comments. I'm going to get on with some painting. Come and join me.
Starting off, we've got a mix of Averland Sunset and Trollslayer Orange over a Vallejo Grey Primer base. This is close to a 50-50 mix. A lot of people struggle when shading yellow, and the problem is if you add black, like most people would, to darken any colour, you end up with a really muted yellow. So in order to darken a yellow, you need something like an orange if you want to keep the vibrancy, but if you want to desaturate it a bit, you can just use a brown. First step here is just to cover the entire model. Make sure you get in all the hidden gaps and nooks and crannies and get everywhere covered in this sort of darkened ochre colour. You may have noticed I'm using the Citadel Air range here, and that's mainly because I like to use the proper Citadel and Warhammer colours when painting Space Marine armour. These are really great because you can spray them straight out of the pot, but the problem with them is that they come in pots and you can't easily transfer them to an airbrush. Next up, we're going in with pure Averland Sunset. So what most people will do when it comes to highlighting a model using an airbrush is they'll spray from 45 degrees and spin the model in a circle, and that's called a zenithal highlight, which is an overall gradient along the surface of the model. But if you really want the model to stand out and for the armor plates and things like that to pop, you've got to do what's called picking out the forms. So everything's a form that is a shape, so things like the arms, things like the legs, the toes, the knees pads, even the backpack is a form. So pick out the highlights on each component individually and the model will look far better for it. So next up is Yriel Yellow, and you'll notice this is a normal layer paint, not an air paint. And the reason for that is Games Workshop don't make a air paint of this colour. Thankfully, just a couple of drops of Vallejo airbrush thinner, 4 or 5 drops of Yriel Yellow layer, and you've got yourself your own airbrush paint. The two colours that Games Workshop do offer are Phalanx Yellow and Flashkitch Yellow, both of which are going to be far too bright for the armour on this Space Marine. So this time we're doing exactly the same as we did before. We're just trying to be a bit more controlled and spray within the areas that we sprayed last time. There's no rule on this, it's not like spray 1/3 or 2/3, just keep building up layers slowly until you are happy with the progression from the new bright yellow highlight to the deep orange base. This next step is optional, but just take some Gryph-Hound orange and you can thin it with contrast medium. To be fair, I'm airbrushing it, I could have easily thinned it with water. So here I'm just kind of doing the opposite of what I did in the last step where I sprayed on the highlights, and I'm using this sort of muddy orange to reinforce some of the shadows in different areas on the model. The good thing about contrast paint is it's super thin, so long as you've got good airbrush control with a decent PSI, then this step is going to be an absolute doddle. So next up, I'm going to use some Silly Putty for masking. This is my favourite product for masking because it's really easy to just build up in layers and then push into place on the model, leaving the only thing exposed as the thing you want to paint. Next, I'm using Rinox hide as a base for the flesh. The reddy brown tones add a really good natural shadow for human skin, so it's a great place to start. Now I'm choosing Deathclaw brown as my first level of skin highlight, mainly because I had nothing else to choose from. And now Kislev flesh as a highlight for the skin, and with this one I'm only going to spray from one side to add some depth across the surface of the face. Removing the silly putty to do the reveal is normally my favourite part of this process, but being a bit heavy-handed, I knocked both axes off the model. The reason I love silly putty is because unlike blue tack, it doesn't fully adhere to the model. Yeah, you get some occasional bits that get stuck, but you can just pick them out with some tweezers or get a big ball of silly putty and then just roll it in and pat it against the model until it comes clean. So I'm now going to use Wraithbone to do all the edge highlighting on the model. I am, however, going to mix this in with a little bit of Yriel yellow just to increase the vibrancy of the colour that we use. And the mix together is going to make a bit of a kind of ice yellow, for lack of a better colour description. So here I'm doing 3 or 4 things at once. I'm mixing the colour whilst adding the paint onto the bristles, then I'm working it off until it softly picks out only the raised edges of features on my texture palette, and then once I've done that, I know that when applying it to the model, it's only going to pick up and highlight those raised edges, thus doing all my edge highlighting in literal minutes. Whilst you'll primarily see me run this along an edge to highlight one, you'll also see me doing this twisting technique, which is smooshing paint onto a model, and that's another way of getting a highlight embedded into a flat surface. So things like that 7 on the shield, that's a good place to pick out because you really want it to catch the eye, which it will do more so when we add a shade. Also here on the top of the chest, that's somewhere that I really want to add some highlight and shine to. Now I'm going to add some Kislev flesh to that Wraithbone and make a mix out of that. I know I could go up and just use flayed one flesh, but I find that a bit thin, whereas using the properties of the denser Wraithbone is much easier for dry brushing. And here I'm just lightly picking out all the edges across the surface of the face. Even in the shadow areas, I want the highlights in there to be super duper bright. I'm now taking Proacl's bright warm grey to paint in any white areas, along with my trusty Artis Opus Series 3, which I use for pretty much everything. Now, I don't know if it's my bottle, but my Proacl bright warm grey actually reads to my eyes as a slightly blue-hued cool grey, which is exactly what we want to contrast against the bright warm yellow on this model. If you haven't tried the Proacl paints yet, do what most people do. Just go and get their white, try it out once, and then have that ooh moment that everyone has. Before long, you'll have bought the entire set. Now to do the red parts, we're going to be using Citadel's Flesh Tearers Red from the Contrast range. The great thing about Citadel contrast paints, like any transparent inks for that matter, is they'll help retain some of that surface level shadow and highlight that you've put on in the previous layer, although in my case I forgot how intense Flesh Tearers Red was and I probably should have thinned it a bit. Now I'm going to use Kislev Flesh again, and this time I'm using it to highlight any of the red areas. And the reason why I use a skin tone is because this is leather, and I was told a long time ago, if you're highlighting leather, well, leather is skin, so if it's worn and damaged, it's going to go back to a natural skin colour. Now I'm doing all the metal areas with Vallejo's Duraluminium from Vallejo Metal Colour range, along with a drop of Contrast Ultramarines Blue. I absolutely love this paint. It's so thin and the coverage is excellent. I'm adding some blue in here, just a drop of blue, so that again I can have that little bit of extra contrast against the bright yellow armour. Please try and ignore the fact that the axe is already partially painted. The reason for this is because I tried recording this before, but I hadn't shooked the Vallejo metal colour paint enough, so it ended up going on too thin. So now I'm just going over, and you can very slightly see that blue just pop out on the edges of this colour. And now I'm going to drop down to the Artis Opus Series S Sights 1. The reason for this, it doesn't give me a sharper point, but what it does is the width of the belly of the brush just gives me a lot more control when trying to get onto some of these areas. If I used a larger brush, I am liable to flood the area with paint, which is what I want to avoid. And now Proacryl's Blue Black, which will read as black when on the model, but we can shade it down with a true black, and that blue is going to give us that little bit of extra contrast against the warm yellow of the armour. Sorry about the footage here, I went out of my focal area on the camera. I'm also now going to step down to the M series brush from Artis Opus. This has a much shorter tip on it, so the bristles are very, very tight. This gives me a lot more control when painting the edge of the insignia. To edge highlight the black, we're using bright warm grey, which I'll say again, looks to me that is a cool grey. That is a bluey grey. Why it's called warm grey, I don't know. But again, work it onto your brush, work it off, and these domed dry brushes allow for a really soft and smooth transition on all of the black areas of the model. And if you hit any of the silver areas, it doesn't matter, it's silver, this is grey, you're not going to see it. And now we're using Snakebite leather. I'm going to thin this again with contrast, and here it's pretty much necessary to use the contrast medium as a thinner. If you use water, then it ends up going a bit blotchy and splotchy. With the contrast medium thinner, it reduces the opacity of the colour, but still allows that level of control where the darker colour goes into the recesses. But you can use a wash or equivalent to do the hair in a deep brown. And now to protect all of that colour, we're going to use Vallejo Gloss Varnish. There's not much to see here. I mean, I'm spraying clear onto a model, so you can't really see it. So let me just tell you, we're heading into the part of the video where it's do what I say, not what I do. And what I did was leave this 20 minutes to dry before the next stage. What you should do is leave it overnight, or at least a few hours.
Time for oil paint.
Oh, forgive me there, I'm not sure what happened to my voice. So first up with oil paints, I'm going to mix a purple colour. The reason mainly is because Abtalung 502, my go-to oils, don't have a deep purple colour. But I want this purple, which is a complementary colour to the yellow of the armour, to be the majority of the shadow. But I am going to decrease the value here with some black and add some brown in there to mute it down. But it just needs that touch of purple to add the contrast that you need. I've also added mineral spirits to the burnt umber and the black, and I'm going to use the thin burnt umber for all of the metallic areas and the black on the reds. Now, the good thing about oil paints is you don't really need to be careful with them, you just slosh it on. And the bit where I said earlier I should have left my varnish to dry, well, we'll come on to that in a second. But just get the purple, dark purple colour that you've made onto the yellow areas. Don't worry if it goes onto the other bits, because adding the mixture between the two areas is going to add a bit of colour modulation and a bit more visual interest to the model. So you really don't need to be careful with this. Just add the dark purple to the yellow, the brown to the metallics, add the black to the reds, and then you are pretty much done. Leave it to one side and let it dry. Just let it go matte. So remember how I said do what I say, not what I do? Well, I didn't do what I've just told you to do. I didn't let it dry at all. In fact, I only did it for about 3 minutes under a hairdryer. So the problem I now have is the areas of the model, the recesses that I want the pigment to stay in, because I didn't let it dry, those areas are still wet with mineral spirits. So as I rub it with my makeup sponge, I'm just lifting it back out. That, coupled with the fact that I didn't leave my gloss varnish overnight to dry, has left me with a very spotted and very speckled surface. The final thing to do on the model though, just to unify everything, is to give it a matte coat, which once again here, you can't really see, but I'll show you in the finished result what the model looks like.
So there we go. Even though I've made a few mistakes and there are parts I'm not happy with, I am still generally quite impressed with the result. And I'm going to stick this model up on eBay. I've been curious about doing this for a while, and it's for an upcoming video that I've got an idea of, but I just want to see what the value of it is. So if you're watching this during the week that this video was released, the model's already been up for a few days and it started at only 1p. So I'm not out there saying, pro painted, £500, you've got to buy this. I just kind of want to see what the value of my artwork and my style is like, even when I've made a few mistakes and a few errors in my general process that I apply. So thank you for watching. Don't forget, we really do need your support. So just quickly comment question of the week, pop a like on the video if you liked it, hell, pop a dislike if you disliked it, but do me a favour, if you disliked it, tell me why. I know there's a few errors in the video, and I will look to improve that in the future. This is one of the first ones I've done, and I've actually forgotten a lot of the things that I did in previous videos, but this is something that I'm going to be doing more and more regularly, so hopefully I'll be able to keep the standard up and keep it quite high. If you want to give me a suggestion to what you want me to paint next, something quick and simple that you just want to get an impressive-ish looking army out on the table, join up on our Patreon. I'm going to be doing a quick announcement and a questionnaire on there to see what people want coming. So if you join our Patreon, it's only £1 a month for now. Come and let me know what you think. And that's everything for now. So I'm going to love you and leave you. Fohammer out. Thanks for your support. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Boom. It's still come out quite impressive, if I do say